Hello. So I am here today, hopefully successfully, to remind every person who is representing people in Canada here in Parliament about our sacred responsibility during this pandemic, because that seems to have been forgotten. I'm going to give the very grim roll call of statistics that just came out today. We are in the midst of a pandemic where we are seeing now 4,000 cases on average per day, 50 deaths per day. We have 45,000 active cases. This week alone, in one day, there were 5,000 new cases of COVID and 83 deaths. If something doesn't change and change soon, we can expect to have up to 10,000 new cases per day. We can expect to have up to 13,000 lives in Canada lost to COVID in this second wave alone. What we are doing is not working, and it is not protecting people in Canada. We are seeing a pandemic and a second wave that has laid waste to our economy, that has fundamentally transformed our society and is continuing to do so, and where many lives have been lost and many more will be lost. And for people like myself who have had immediate family, loved ones die within this pandemic and because of the pandemic, there is no question that I should not have to be reminding anyone in this House about how incredibly important it is for us to remain laser focused on the pandemic, because it has not improved, it has not stabilized, it is worse. And so what we have been called to do, what we are called to do as people who represent the public interest, what the federal government has been called to do just as recently as yesterday by the Canadian Medical Association and by doctors and nurses and frontline workers all across this country, is to do what is necessary to protect people in Canada. And in this respect, I'm going to quote, because I believe the president of the Canadian Medical Association said it very, very well. What she said yesterday is that there has been a lack of collaboration and coordination. And where the breakdown has occurred is that information has not necessarily been brought together in a collaborative way with all levels of government. And what the Canadian Medical Association, and I echo that call, called on the Prime Minister and the federal government to do, is to join together with the other levels of government as quickly as possible in order to protect the health of all Canadians. I've been very disappointed to see opposition motions being used during these opposition days in order to call for things that, while some of them have been interesting, some of them have merit, certainly have had virtually nothing to do with the pandemic. Yesterday, when I called upon the Prime Minister to form an intergovernmental task force on COVID so that we could have the data-driven, science-based advice that we needed to tackle this pandemic, I didn't hear anything from the opposition. Instead, the NDP used their time in the House to call on President Biden, the President-elect Biden, to visit Canada. And while I, like many Canadians, welcome President-elect Biden's victory and his ultimate visit to Canada, my question is that the best use of the time in the House? Is that the thing that the NDP should have been putting forward in the House yesterday? And what could that time have been better used for had it been used to discuss the pandemic and how we are going to confront it together and across party lines? And this was in a day, I will mention, that 74 died. I will also say, with respect to the Conservative motion today, while the Green Party of Canada has extremely grave reservations about the participation of Huawei in our 5G infrastructure, and while we have extreme concerns about the pressure and the intimidation and foreign interference that China has demonstrated of late with respect to Canada and Canadians, calling upon the government at this time to make the decisions that their motion calls upon them to make within the next 30 days, I will ask them, what might those 30 days have done? And what could those 30 days do on behalf of people in Canada if all of the parties were spending their time focused on the pandemic where their attention should be? And so once again, I call upon the Prime Minister, I call upon our federal government, I call upon all of us across party lines to support the convening of an intergovernmental COVID-19 task force. The task force would be led and driven by the medical and health officials. It's a task force that would set national thresholds, a task force that would have clear and consistent national messaging on the use of personal protective equipment, a national task force that would create national coding, and a national task force that would create finally a reliable and effective testing and tracing strategy for our country. Et alors en français, juste pour dire que j'étais vraiment déçue hier de voir l'NPD utiliser leur motion pour inviter le président élu de visiter le Canada. Et moi, comme tous les autres Canadiens, sont très intéressés de voir le président élu visiter le Canada. Mais je me demande qu'est-ce qu'on pouvait faire, nous pourrons faire avec le temps que nous avons utilisé dans la Chambre pour discuter cette motion, si nous avons décidé de l'utiliser pour considérer comment nous allons attaquer et lutter contre la pandémie. Nous sommes en train de vivre une des plus grands cas d'urgence que notre pays a jamais vécu. Et je vais noter, souligner encore que la semaine passée, nous avons eu 5000 cas d'infection et 83 morts. Nous sommes en train de créer une suite de circonstances où nous allons voir peut-être 13 000 morts et 10 000 cas par jour dans les prochaines semaines. Alors maintenant, c'est le moment de protéger les vies. C'est le moment de protéger notre société. C'est le moment de protéger notre économie. Et nous puissions seulement le faire si tous les partis joint ensemble pour demander la création d'un panel intergouvernemental sur le COVID qui est dirigé par la science, qui est dirigé par les experts médicaux et qui va mettre en place toutes les mesures nécessaires pour protéger les gens. Je demande à mes collègues dans les autres partis de se souvenir que leur responsabilité en ce moment, c'est de protéger les gens. Nous avons, et je ne comprends pas pourquoi, mais nous avons arrêté de parler du COVID. On dit que c'est une matière pour les provinces. On dit que on parle comme c'est une matière qui n'occupe pas notre gouvernement fédéral. Et moi, je dis que je soutiens les appels de l'Association médicale du Canada pour une approche collaborative, une approche coopérative entre les différents niveaux de gouvernement, parce que ce que nous avons en ce moment ne fonctionne pas. Et j'ai été déçue hier de ne pas voir les autres partis en opposition joigner avec le Parti vert pour appeler au gouvernement et au Premier ministre de créer cette COVID-19 Task Force. Mais je les invite maintenant et je leur rappelle que notre solennelle responsabilité, c'est de protéger les gens ici au Canada. Nous n'avons pas réussi et nous ne réussirons pas si on ne le fait pas ensemble. Et je prends les questions maintenant.
So we'll now go to questions, starting with questions on the phone. Reminder, one question, one follow-up per reporter. Nous allons maintenant passer aux questions, commençant par les questions au téléphone. Un petit rappel que c'est une question suivie par journaliste. Operator, do we have a first question? Opérateur, avons-nous une première question?
I'm sorry. The first question is from Manon Carlelier, Le Devoir. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Manon Cornelier?
Non, c'est
Bonjour.
toi.
Oui, OK. Oui, je voudrais savoir, Madame Paul, quand vous parlez d'un panel intergouvernemental, est-ce que c'est un panel intergouvernemental fédéral ou vous voulez dire fédéral, provincial, territorial?
Oui, fédéral, provincial, territorial. Et je ne parle pas d'un panel où le gouvernement fédéral impose quoi que ce soit sur les autres niveaux de gouvernement. Je parle d'un panel qui est là pour travailler dans une manière coopérative et collaborative pour adresser les besoins urgents dont nous faisons face à cause de la pandémie. C'est clair, comme j'ai dit, notre association médicale a vraiment souligné hier que notre approche ne fonctionne pas et que nous n'allons jamais arriver à lutter dans une manière efficace contre la pandémie si nous n'avons pas une approche collaborative et coopérative et intergouvernementale.
Mais j'essaie de comprendre, ce panel-là imposerait des règles à tout le monde ou bien les gouvernements provinciaux et fédéraux restent responsables face à leurs citoyens des mesures qu'ils prennent eux-mêmes?
Mais ce n'est pas
j'essaie de comprendre un peu que fait un tel panel.
Le panel, comme je dis, c'est un panel qui va créer des standards nationaux, qui va aussi créer un système de codification qui est aussi national. Nous sommes en train d'avoir des messages très mixtes et qui créent beaucoup de confusion entre les gens. C'est nécessaire de parler avec une voix. C'est nécessaire comme l'association médicale réclame, de coordonner la distribution et la dissémination d'informations. En ce moment, tout ça n'existe pas. Et je veux souligner, ce n'est pas une question d'imposition. Nous avons, en plusieurs moments dans notre histoire ici au Canada, nous avons eu des moments où c'était nécessaire pour protéger les gens, pour faire face à une crise, d'avoir une approche coordonnée et collaborative. Alors, à mon avis, ça ne devrait jamais être nécessaire pour le gouvernement fédéral d'imposer quoi que ce soit sur les provinces pour arriver à une solution à une crise nationale.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Il n'y a plus de questions sur le téléphone.
Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions dans la salle. David?
Hi, Madam Paul.
Hi, David.
How are you doing today?
Good, thank you.
I'm wondering, whatever this panel decides, whatever is agreed by consensus, would it be binding on the provinces and territories? Are you proposing that, or would this be merely recommendations?
This is, and I'm not taking this from your question, but it's an opportunity for me to lament how far we have come from the days where we created national strategies and programs together. These were not things that were imposed by one level of government on another. These were things that were done in a collaborative way, in a cooperative way, exactly because we understood that they could only be done. Our great national programs like the Canada Health Act, for instance, our pension plan, these things could only be done if the various levels of government cooperated. And so I'm saying that we are once again at that crossroads. We are once again in a moment of national crisis. The reason we have a federation is exactly so that we can confront these great challenges collaboratively and together. And so what I'm saying is that our Prime Minister and our federal government should show leadership in convening this task force. And I say task force, David, because I really want people to feel a sense of urgency and action. I wanted to, action words. They should convene, the federal government should show the leadership in convening, and then collaboratively, all of our provinces, territories, and our federal government should agree together on the composition of that task force, on the mandate of that task force, in a way that ensures that they can get to work as soon as possible and create the coordinated strategy that the Canadian Medical Association and many of our unions, our medical unions and frontline workers are asking for.
I do have a follow-up to that.
Okay.
And I also have a question about something else. I'm wondering if I can ask that. Okay. Okay, so let me just follow up to that. What happens when they disagree? What happens when already we're seeing the disagreement with different premiers? What happens when we all get to the table and we're all tasked to do whatever we need to do and people don't agree?
Well, then I hope that the Canadian public will put the pressure that they should on their officials to make sure that they put their disagreements aside and come to an agreement. This is, and the reason I started with the roll call of statistics is that this is a matter of life and death. You know, this is not an area where there should ever be any squabbling, any politics, any partisanship. We're talking about doing what we need to do in order to protect people in Canada. And, you know, it's not a question of going from zero to, you know, the nuclear options of the Emergencies Act. We're talking about taking the intervening steps to try to come to an agreement about a national coordinated approach. And so I want to believe, until I see evidence to the contrary, that our provinces are willing to sit down with the federal government to come up with that strategy, exactly because, as I said, the people who are on the front lines, they are asking for it, and what we are doing now simply is not working.
I'll check on the phone if we have another question, operator.
We do not have any questions on the phone.
David, you may ask
Thank
your
you,
other
Christine.
question.
So here's my other question to you, Madam Paul. What are your concerns that an MP like Yasmin Ratanzi was able to hire her sister without the ethics commissioner or the board of internal economy doing anything about it?
Well, I have to admit that over the last 48 hours in particular, I've been extremely focused on the inaction around the pandemic. And I had hoped to wake up today and be able to say that the other opposition parties had reached out to us in support of this strategy that our frontline workers are now asking for. And they haven't, and so I've been preoccupied with that. But you know, again, I would say that we have rules in place. I expect myself, the members of our caucus, to follow them. I would expect that all of the political party leaders expect the same thing of the members of their caucus. And so, if there have been any irregularities, if there has been any divergence from the rules, then I hope that will be investigated.
Yeah, I mean, does it just? And I know you're really focused on the COVID-19 emergency, and it is an emergency, and it is a crisis, and it's taking all your energy. But you know, we still have procedure. We still have to hold our MPs accountable for other things. So, what does it say that an MP could, for so long, fly under the radar, hiring her sister?
Well, there's clearly something that needs to be investigated there. It's an excellent question. All I can say at this point is that it's an excellent question. Rules are only as good as their enforcement, as the structures that we have in order to keep people accountable to them. I was talking about that yesterday in the context of the climate accountability legislation. It's all very nice to have an ambition, whether it's about ethics standards or about tackling the climate emergency. But if you do not have enforcement mechanisms, if you do not have penalties for violations, if you do not have a robust review and audit of those who are expected to expect those rules, then they're really just platitudes. And so, again, in this case, if there are rules that have been broken and if there have been failures in the system that have allowed a violation to continue for a very long period of time, then we want to make sure that that those holes are plugged and that we have really robust enforcement of our most important legislation.
And I'll check one more time if we have a question on the phone. Et je vérifie une dernière fois si nous avons une question au téléphone, opérateur.
Thank you. Merci. There are no questions on the phone.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
Merci.